With satellite imaging and side-scan sonar, virtually every square inch of earth and sea has already been mapped. There is no great undiscovered continent left to be found. But perhaps old maps could point the way to where Atlantis used to be. To us, they appear as mythical as the legendary continent itself.
Scholars have located Atlantis in just about every place you can imagine. From South America to Antarctica to islands in the Indian Ocean to Australia to North America to islands in the Aegean.
Among the many supposed maps of Atlantis are several which support the most far-out theory we explored in our search for the lost continent. This map, called the Krenna map, dates from the 17th century and correctly identifies the contours of a pre-Ice Age Antarctica. Curiously, Antarctica is labeled Insula Atlantis, Latin for the island of Atlantis.
These maps are a surviving fingerprint of the great lost civilization that some people call Atlantis.
Somehow these cartographers knew what Antarctica looked like 300 years before the invention of sonar, radar, or deep drilling. Was it a lucky guess, or did they hear about the continent from the descendants of people who had lived there when it was free of ice, and when it was called Atlantis?
The most famous of these maps was drawn by a Turkish admiral in 1513. His name was Piri Reis, and he stated on his map that he based it on more than 20 earlier source maps, some of which went back to before the time of Christ into ancient Egypt.
The Piri Reis map was discovered in 1953 by Professor Charles Hapgood, who used it to develop a controversial theory about the location of Atlantis. Hancock explains Hapgood's theory.
From time to time, the entire outer crust of the Earth can shift catastrophically in one piece over the body of the Earth, like the loose skin of a tangerine orange moving around the fruit.
According to Hapgood's theory, 12,000 years ago, North America was over the North Pole. Antarctica, or Atlantis, as Hapgood believed, was much closer to the equator, free of ice. Then the crust slipped, and all the continents shifted. Atlantis' final resting place was the South Pole. It's a theory that cost Hapgood his career and his reputation. Many scientists agree that the Earth's crust has slipped, but geologists like Professor Floyd McCoy of the University of Hawaii insist that this did not happen overnight.
In plate tectonics, that is one hunk of land that for the last, say, 200 million years has not moved very far. Ice shelves have been there for a long time. They've certainly been there for the last 40,000 years, intact.
Many mainstream geologists agree. The topography of Earth in the year 10,000 BC was almost identical to what it is today. So old maps don't seem to lead us there. We need more specific directions, and it seems Plato may have left those behind. There was an island opposite the strait you call the Pillars of Hercules. An island larger than Libya and Asia combined. This is how Plato described the location of Atlantis, using real landmarks that would have been very familiar to his contemporaries.
I take Plato literally. I feel that where he says Atlantis is and the time frame is where Atlantis was and when it was. And that is in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillar of Hercules.
Most scholars believe that the Pillars of Hercules refers to the Strait of Gibraltar. Here, towering pillar-like rocks on either side of a narrow channel form a gateway between the old world of the Mediterranean and the great Atlantic Ocean beyond.
I would think that Atlantis can be found in the mid-Atlantic ridge around the Azores and is now really a sunken area of the mid-Atlantic.
Today, only the very tips of the mid-Atlantic ridge are still visible. And this is where Plato's words seem to lead us first, to the Azores. The Azores are 9 small islands, 1,000 miles west of the Portuguese mainland. The islands are volcanic, and there have been earthquakes here. The country also bears a striking resemblance to the idyllic paradise described by Plato.
When we look at the Azores, we see what is apparently the mountaintops of Atlantis. We have volcanic action, there are hot springs there.
Water from the Azores hot springs is piped into therapeutic baths. And just as in the story of Atlantis, people here believe the waters have mysterious healing properties. The lush landscape reveals an abundance of plants you wouldn't expect to find in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And just offshore, northern birds traveling south for the winter circle the same area but do not land, suggesting there used to be land here. There are eels from North America and Europe who swim thousands of miles from opposite shores to spawn here. But there is something missing in the Azores. There are no ancient ruins that point to the actual existence of an ancient civilization.
Why aren't we finding these megalithic cities of Atlantis and the Azores? Well, it's because they're all underwater.
So we brought underwater cameras to the Azores to search for hard evidence of an ancient submerged civilization. Anything that might prove this undersea world was once home to more than just marine life. There were intriguing tunnels to follow, but they didn't lead to any evidence that a submerged city would be found here. It was easy to let the imagination run wild and see an ancient rampart in the ocean rock, or the arching doorway of an Atlantean palace. But there was nothing in this part of the Atlantic to prove the existence of Atlantis.
Just suppose that the United States was suddenly to be racked with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and tidal waves, and that the whole country was destroyed, and then finally it sunk to the bottom of the ocean. In 11,000 years, do you think they would find an airplane or an automobile? Very unlikely, and they would probably conclude that America never existed.
Edgar Evans Cayce believes that the Azores may very well be part of ancient Atlantis, but he is also very familiar with other Atlantean theories, because his father, the world-renowned psychic Edgar Cayce, made several amazing predictions about the lost continent. Until his death in 1945, Edgar Cayce was the world's premier psychic medium, paranormal investigator, and spiritual healer. Known as the father of holistic medicine, Cayce built his reputation by curing seemingly incurable illnesses at his private hospital in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Edgar Cayce was a firm believer in reincarnation. He claimed that the reason he had extraordinary psychic ability and healing power was because he could channel all the knowledge of his past lives, and he had lived one of those past lives in Atlantis. Known as the sleeping prophet, Cayce would enter a trance state. He claimed to then be able to regress back to Atlantis and recall its wonders.
And as this then was in that particular plane or sphere which...
Cayce described in vivid detail his remembrances of Atlantean aircraft, machinery run by electricity, and their weapons of destruction.
That which in the present is termed the death ray or supercosmic ray, that will be found in the next 25 years.
The death ray Cayce described had many of the same characteristics of modern lasers, or some say nuclear weaponry. And it was this that destroyed Atlantis. But if Atlantis had been the great hub of technology that Cayce claimed to envision, why didn't that technology survive?
Well, I don't think it's difficult to think that technical civilizations have developed in the past. I mean, I can remember when there were no jet planes and no television and no computers and lasers, and that's in the last 50 to 100 years. So what could develop in 11,000 years is certainly could be more than that. But a technical civilization is probably the easiest kind to destroy because it's based so much on people would know about an automobile, but most people couldn't build one if they were suddenly deprived of one.
Cayce's psychic visions of a past life in Atlantis are beyond proof, and many people have doubted his veracity.
I'll admit it would be a lot easier if he'd never mentioned Atlantis, because it's some of the hardest stuff to believe in the readings.
And Cayce might never have received any attention for his outrageous Atlantean visions if he had not made a series of startling predictions that all came true. He predicted the exact date for the end of World War II and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Edgar Cayce predicted that the western edge of Atlantis would begin to reappear near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas. He predicted the discovery would occur in 1968 or 69. And in fact, 23 years after Cayce died, in 1968, divers found the apparent ruins of prehistoric walls and roads off the coast of Bimini.
When we return, an undersea excursion off the coast of Bimini, where interlocking slabs of stone may lead to Atlantis.
Oh, it's a road, all right.
The amazing Bimini discoveries and their connection to a buried city half a world away. Next on Atlantis, in search of a lost continent.